Are you in a dressing gown?
No, I'm not. I'm in one of
Really?
those big oversized hoodies. This is a problem with recording in the garage. It's a little bit chilly.
Just getting Hugh Hefner vibes.
The playmates are amusing themselves next door.
You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file.
That doesn't sound too hard.
This is Making Tracks.
This is the way.
Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
I know these people. They are brutal. Does this look Jedi to you?
That's not how the Force works.
They'll never see it coming.
Count me in.
So you may remember many moons ago. So I picked up from a crew member the ILM VFX hat.
Ooh,
Cool.
very nice.
They also gave me a couple of call sheets.
Ooh.
I thought it was quite interesting to kind of like try and work out, because obviously I don't know much about the production of Rise of Skywalker. I'm going to read out some stuff and see if you can maybe piece together where we are.
Okay.
Let's go with the first one. So this is from the 22nd of August, 2018. And this is interior Manhattan corridor. So that is a scene that they filmed. And on the cast call sheet, we've got Jazz, Fred, Nathan, Brendan, Tall Guy, Steadfast, and Abril Ninga.
Are you sure this isn't an episode of Our Feed the Same Pet?
I'm pretty sure, man. Stage 3, Pinewood.
I've heard of Pinewood. When you talk to Neil Scanlon about B2 Emo, he doesn't know him as B2 Emo, he knows him as Buzz. So there's a lot of guys who work on the films that don't know the names of the characters or what they ended up as. So I wonder if there's actors out there who did something on Rise of Skywalker and you go, you played Glurber de Blue Blue. And they go, oh yeah, I think we called him Jack. There must be actors out there that are like oblivious to the character or the screen names that they ended up with.
Oh, yeah, totally. And again, this is just the big assumption is you assume the tall guy is Chewbacca.
Probably Maz.
It could be. But because it's a corridor and it's an interior corridor set, I was just like, oh, I wonder what that could be. Let me have a look at the second one. So the second one's from the 4th of September, so Tuesday, the 4th of September, 2018. Okay, so this is also an interior, but this is interior Honolulu.
Oh, okay. That's probably Acto.
Yes. And I think that's a good shout because, and we could probably start to kind of like work some of these out. So the cast, again, is Jazz, Fred, Tall Guy, Borin, Boo, Lieutenant Connix,
okay.
Crackle, Claude.
This isn't Acto then, this is Ajahn Kloss.
I would think so. Lieutenant Draper, and then Pirate 1, 2, 3, and 4, and Beaumont.
Yeah.
So that probably is. So Honolulu's probably going to be Agent Kloss. There's a VFX conference on the 22nd of August. They call it the Carrie Fisher Conference. And everybody's on that. Dan Mindell, Roger Guyatt, Katie Hazel, Andrew Rowland. So a lot of big kind of names from, ILM and stuff. So I thought it was interesting. So I was wondering, I wonder if Manhattan could be the crashed Death Star.
As in Manhattan Project?
Potentially, yeah. Or at least Endor, or the Endor moon. If we assume that Jazz is Rey and Fred is Finn, then obviously you've got Tall Guy, it's quite possible. So yeah, there you go. So these are quite cool. Just 2 call sheets of many. But yeah, as a snapshot into the production for Trixie, I thought that was pretty cool.
Very cool indeed. Makes you wonder what other names they came up with. But here's some names, whilst we're on the subject of interesting Star Wars things. The 82nd Annual Golden Globe nominations happened this week. There's loads of Star Wars-related people nominated in those awards, led by Harrison Ford, who was nominated for Best Male Actor in a Supporting Role in Television for his role in Shrinking. Still blows my mind Harrison Ford's doing television. But how cool. So many people are saying that this role is the best thing he's ever done. I've not seen it. Have you seen any episodes of Shrinking yet?
No, not at all.
Big time need to see it. It's on Apple, which is not one of the streamers we get. But got to put that right.
Exactly. That's why, in fairness, every time you buy an Apple product, I tend to give it Apple TV or what have you. So next time I break my iPhone and I have to get it replaced, I use that free trial and catch up on some of this stuff.
I bought a bag of Granny Smiths. I didn't get a single thing. I've been gypped, but there you go. Andor has got a couple of actors in there as well. Diego Luna in La Maquina and Eben Moss-Backrack, who's going to be in the Fantastic Four movie next year, is in The Bear. He was nominated as well. Donald Glover from Solo: A Star Wars Story, and hopefully one day, maybe perhaps Lando, the big screen film, was nominated for Best Male Actor in a Television Series for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. There's loads of Star Wars people. Ewan McGregor was nominated as well for A Gentleman in Moscow. Daniel Craig, and that's a spurious link, but we're going to go with it. FN 1824 from The Force Awakens was nominated for Best Male Actor in a Motion Picture for Queer. Felicity Jones, obviously Jin from Rogue One, and hey, who knows, maybe another TV project in the future. Best Female Actor in a Supporting Role for The Brutalist. Keira Knightley for Black Doves. Kerry Russell for The Diplomat. There's loads and loads, but here's the one I thought was the most interesting. Cinematic and Box Office Achievement category. Every single film nominated has a Star Wars ILM or Skywalker Sound connection. I'm going to go through it because there's loads. Alien Romulus, it's got ILM and Skywalker Sound. Beetlejuice, Neil Scanlon's Creature Shop worked on it. Brian Herring and Nick Kellington were amongst the performers. Deadpool and Wolverine, ILM and Skywalker Sound. Gladiator 2, ILM and Skywalker Sound. Inside Out 2 had Skywalker Sound audio. Twisters was ILM and Skywalker Sound. Wicked, ILM and Skywalker Sound. And The Wild Robot had Lupita Nyong'o, Mark Hamill, Pedro Pascal, and Skywalker Sound. So it's a win, whatever happens in those categories. The winners are all announced on Sunday, the 5th of January, 2025. What do you make of that wonderful list of nominees?
I mean, if you were to do a Venn diagram of all that, in the dead center would probably be Lucasfilm and Star Wars. I think we sometimes forget just how amazing and how much of an industry cornerstone both ILM and Skywalker Sound are. The fact that they're in so many box office achievement films kind of says it all, really, doesn't it? A lot of those films, in fact, every single one of those films makes sense that they're all pretty heavy VFX based or CGI, let's say VFX based and effects based, because we don't want to kind of say everything's CGI, because actually, as we're seeing with even Skeleton Crew, but actually something you think is pure CGI is actually a combination of like 3 or 4 different techniques.
Absolutely. And it's a great point you make. And it's something that came into the news this week. Todd Vaziri from ILM, one of the co-hosts on the Lighter Darker podcast, made a point to say that a lot of what you see isn't what you think you're seeing. For example, Neil in Skeleton Crew is part animatronic, it's part performance, it's part the kid that voices in Robert, it's part Legacy doing the on-set animatronics and ILM pulling it all together. So certain scenes are purely ILM, certain scenes are the animatronic and everything comes together. I mean, even experienced eyes wouldn't be able to delineate that, but unless we knew that, you would just assume it's either all ILM or it's all animatronic. It's exactly like you just said.
You use multiple techniques to get the best result rather than just going with one just to either save money or, and I'm sure actually, whichever one is probably a little bit cost effective probably comes into it to an extent. But some of these budgets are so big that you think, well, if this is going to cost us an extra 10 grand or 5 grand or something, but actually it's going to look so much better if we went down whatever road, be it like a CGI road for one scene and what have you, it makes sense. Even when we're talking on Reaction Crew the other night, actually, with Sander, I think I kind of said that I wouldn't be surprised if Kim, the owl cat character, was probably a combination of different disciplines.
Hi, this is Andy Seacombe, otherwise known as Watto, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So the week that Eben Moss-Backrack was announced as a potential Golden Globe winner with his nomination, Jeremy Allen White, his co-star in The Bear, has also been announced as joining the Star Wars galaxy. He will voice the son of Jabba the Hutt, Rotter the Hutt, last seen in the Clone Wars movie way back in 2008, directed by Dave Filoni. I think everyone is kind of surprised. This feels like it's coming completely out of the blue. I can't imagine casting an actor of his caliber in a role like the voice of Rotter the Hutt, because surely they're going to have to do a lot of audio tweaking, audio twisting. But then again, if Jeremy Allen White says, I'd play anything in Star Wars, like Samuel L. Jackson saying, I'd be a stormtrooper, and he got this great role, what do you make of an actor of his caliber being the voice of Rotter the Hutt?
We had Alfred Molina in Skeleton Crew this week, one of the pirates. I think it does make sense, because I don't really know the actor, to be fair. I've not seen The Bear. I think I've seen a couple of other things that he's been in. Iron Claw, for one.
Yeah, Iron Claw's fantastic.
It could just be one of those things. It could be a friend of like Filoni or Favreau or something. I think it's quite cool though, isn't it? Casting aside that we're getting more Rotter the Hutt, because you think about it, he was kind of like the MacGuffin of the Clone Wars theatrical movie. did we see anything from him afterwards?
I don't believe so. You're absolutely right. That's the perfect phrase for Rotter. He was the MacGuffin in that film. It's a great way of putting it. Back then, how many years before? Where are we now? We're 9 years after, so it's 30. So it's pretty much 30 years on, 35 years on. He fit in somebody's backpack back then, didn't he? Now you're assuming. I know Huts lived for hundreds of years, but he's probably
bloody big backpack to fit.
Yeah, I think he's probably the size that Jabba was in the original special edition when he wasn't the size he was in Jedi. And they come up with all these really lame. He had a growth spurt. Yeah, he's 600 years old. I don't think he's having growth spurts at this point. But I think he'll probably be more that sort of size than Jabba on the dais, huge, great big Hut.
Maybe the growth spurts of Huts is probably something that has not been explored fully in today's Star Wars canon. So it's very
There's a book in that. There's surely a book in that.
Exactly. Yeah. maybe that's what's going to be Free Comic Book Days comic.
But I wonder, you say about an actor of his level coming into Star Wars, and I'd love to know what you think about this, because we go to a lot of conventions, we see a lot of faces, meet a lot of people. If you're Jeremy Allen White and somebody says, do you want to be the voice of a Hutt in Star Wars? And it's like, yeah. What's one of the cool spin-offs from that? You might get invited to Celebration. You can go on the convention circuit if you want to. Maybe it's just a cool thing that he was a Star Wars kid and it's just the cool thing he wants to do.
Exactly. They put a lot of modulation and they pitch those voices down for Hutts especially. It may not be that his voice is very distinguishable, and also that means that maybe they're just like, oh, we haven't got anything for you now, but in the Ray film or in the James Mangold film, and he could take on that role without there being a big cataclysm on screen because he's played somebody else.
And also, it's a bit of star power. You got Sigourney Weaver in there. You got apparently Pedro Pascal has gone in this week to do his stuff, because we know he wasn't on set because he was doing Fantastic Four. So that's done. Grogu, of course, is the star power in that film. We all know it. But you get some other headliner actors to have their name in that cast list. It doesn't hurt, does it?
No, exactly. It fills the cast up, like you said, with names. It means that there's more talent talking about it. It can never really be, I don't think, a bad thing.
Absolutely. I'm just looking at on the site. I mean, Mark Hamill last night did a live performance of It's a Wonderful Life with some other, amongst others, fellow Star Wars performers, Tom Kenny, Clancy Brown, Phil Lamar, and it was for the Ed Asner Family Centre, which is helping kids with autism within their communities. And Ed Asner was the voice of Jabba the Hutt in the Return of the Jedi radio drama. If you didn't know that Ed Asner was the voice of Jabba, you wouldn't know he was the voice of Jabba. So I think it's kind of in that wheelhouse. It's star power, because we know that people like David Collins and Matt Wood and the looping team at Skywalker Sound and all of those folks could do all these voices quite comfortably, and probably will if we ever get an animated spin-off. But I think the star power of having a name like that makes all the sense.
Hi there, this is Mike Quinn. I played Nine Num in Return of the Jedi and the new trilogy, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So great news if you're enjoying Skeleton Crew so far, and who isn't, and if you're not, you're watching it wrong. John Watts and Chris Ford have come out and said there is the potential of a second season, and that they kind of know what they would do if it came back and moved on. It's all dependent on viewing figures, of course, but they say we 100% have an idea for a second season, and we know what we would do. We have a built-in ticking clock of the kids and their age, and by the time we would get production going, we know what age they would be. So they're clearly thinking about this. So we will be writing towards that. You'll be growing up with the kids. It will be something like a 3 to 4 year time jump to make sense. We haven't seen the kids in a while, so it just depends on how tall the kids are. But we wouldn't do a Stranger Things thing where we're like, it's the next day, because it won't be. It's built into it that it will be a bigger time jump forward because it just takes so long to get things moving. This isn't like it would take place the next day because the kids are going to be older. So they know what they want to do, and they seem to be mentioning it in press junkets, reasonably confident that this is going to happen. Lucasfilm haven't said anything one way or the other as to whether or not this show's going to or move on, or if they're looking at doing a second season. We've not seen any viewing figures yet. I certainly haven't. But 90% of people are very, very positive. What do you think about them already thinking ahead to a season 2? Because let's not forget, Leslie Headland was talking about multiple seasons of Acolyte.
Yes, she was. I don't think Acolyte had such a good Rotten Tomatoes score, both with the critics and with the audience. And I think that says something. I'd be well up for it. I think it's a great show. I would think, I mean, I do it now when I'm working on a series of stuff. You might not start talking about it in episode 1, but if you're doing episode like 6 episodes, maybe about episode 4 or 5, there's always talk about, is this going to get picked up again? What would the directors might change and stuff? And, sometimes they ask my opinions on actually, how could we make this better in terms of production aspect of it? So I think all that kind of stuff is on people's minds. And I think if it is as popular as people think it is, or it seems to be at the moment, and unless, of course, it takes a really, really harsh left turn and then kind of nosedives, I think they probably would be nuts to at least not try for another series, if nothing else. Run under the assumption that they will, the kids will make it home. They may not make it home at the end of first season, and it could just be something they've just done a lost in space kind of thing, and Voyager, and they're just out there now and just traveling around. There's nothing to say that they have to get back, and the At Attin mystery could be solved and revealed without the kids ever returning back to the planet. And maybe actually the altruistic part of the kids, if we bring anybody back to the planet, we're bringing danger on us, on our families and the rest of the inhabitants. So actually the safest thing is for us to not return. There's a number of different ways you could approach this.
We had a listener's question coming from Mark and Corin Spriggs, who are regular listeners and sending questions very often. And I'm going to paraphrase their question because it kind of folds into what you've pretty much picked up on there. The thought that the kids could bring back a lot of trouble if they make their way back to At Attin. It's great for them and it's great for their parents, but in the long term, it might not be the best thing for the planet. And Mark says, thoroughly enjoying Skeleton Crew. Do you think we might see the return of something from Legends with a society hidden behind a spatial barrier? And he gives a couple of examples, the Hapens, which we spoke about with Sander on Reaction Crew the other day, in Athens Space, and he mentions the outbound flight as well. Curious to hear your thoughts. Cheers, Mark and Corin Spriggs. So to fold that in, I wonder, what you just said has really got my brain going. The two brain cells met in the middle for a moment. The thought that, maybe the kids don't get home at the end of season 1. Maybe this doesn't put a button on it. A bit like the end of Ahsoka. Yeah, the good guys end up in the bad guys' place and the bad guys end up in the good guys' place. And you've got to have a second season to push it forward. And maybe Skeleton Crew was made as a one and done, but maybe they leave us with a cliffhanger, which, end of season 3, Next Generation type, oh God, what's going to happen next time? We need to know what happens next. And they pick it up. And of course, as Chris Ford and John Watts allude to, as I say, you and me met the kids. They've grown a lot as we met them on Trafalgar Square since what we're seeing on the screen, which was probably, 18 months ago, something like that.
Yeah.
They've got to factor in that age difference. It's an interesting thought. Do you think, firstly, on the point of At Attin, it does feel like that's what we're getting, doesn't it? Obviously, with what's laid out, it's a hidden world. It's become a myth in the Star Wars galaxy, but we know that thousands of years of the Republic and the Jedi, by the time of Star Wars, has basically become a myth. Luke's there almost like disbelieving the fact that there's the Jedi. Han Solo doesn't really believe in the Force. It's just gone to dust in no time at all. Something like that could have happened to At Attin, couldn't it?
Oh, it could be. And to be honest, it only took Palpatine or somebody to just erase Kamino from the records, from the Jedi archives. And we saw how, within their infinite hubris, they just went, oh, well, if a planet's not on the records, it doesn't exist. How quickly would it be that if a planet and the inhabitants want to not be found, it would make it easier for them to kind of hide themselves? Like we started to kind of speculate as to why they were there in the episode of Reaction Crew. If it's part of the great works, but maybe it's something that needs to be protected, be it that it's like a Republic gold reserve or what have you, or you probably wouldn't just be broadcasting to the masses where this place is. In fact, you wouldn't want it to be there. You would want to hide it. I think the Hapes cluster was the one that really, they didn't want any outside interference from memory. And so also that's the other thing is like actually has somebody, be it, the supervisor, is it down to them? They made a decision to kind of recede from the galaxy.
Yeah.
And by doing that, because they are the supervisor, he's been able to kind of she or they or it, been able to exert their influence on the rest of the inhabitants. And that is now the common thinking, because they've not known any other way. And you kind of get that, don't you, a little bit with William's dad. He's kind of sitting back and he doesn't look worried in respect of, he's obviously worried for his son, but I think he's starting to maybe like things might start to fall into place, and we probably might even see it in this episode. Actually, hang on a second, this starts to make a little bit of sense. If we've been not connected to the galaxy in the same way, then all these decisions makes more sense. So with respect to the question and like bringing in some legend stuff, I suppose it could. Because that was all kind of tied in from memory into like really the origin of Thrawn, wasn't it? Like that was Timothy Zahn's way of really, in the Legends, bringing back how Thrawn then becomes aware of stuff like the Empire and that. But then there's nothing to say that you couldn't take influences of that, for example.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com. for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
I wonder, though, watching it, it's easy to get caught up in a very positive way in the adventures of the kids.
Yes.
Because it nails that, as we say, and will say ad infinitum about this show, it nails that Amblin vibe. It's got that Goonies feel and all of that. It's clearly bolted into the design of the show and the way they create the characters. And that's fine. That's great. I just wonder, as we move into the season, how surprised we're going to be at how much architecture there is under the plot. Because it does feel like At Attin is important beyond just being in this show, like Rotter was the MacGuffin in the Clone Wars movie. At Attin's the MacGuffin in this show. It feels like it's part of a much bigger scope. And I'm now thinking for the first time, even as we're talking about this, that Skeleton Crew, the world of Skeleton Crew, some of the characters in Skeleton Crew might just have some sort of effect and influence, not only or not just on Mandalorian and Grogu, but more specifically the film that comes after that, the Filoni one, the one that wraps up the Mandoverse. It just felt, because this is in that time period, and it kind of feels like it was put there on purpose. I mean, I asked Watson Ford about that, and they said they hadn't really given it intense thought, but it made the most sense to put it in this time period when it actually came to it. So I just wonder if that's going to play out in 2, 3, 4 years' time.
I mean, it's not necessarily like retcon, but it's like we don't necessarily know how other creators like Filoni will maybe kind of fold that into his next films. Because now it's a planet, we've got some characters there, and this is what we always see with Star Wars. And I think one of the things that we always struggle as fans is because we take it as being a certain way, but then we see maybe a slightly different perspective, or well, actually it is a full planet. So yes, maybe one side of At Attin is this nice suburbia, and the other side could be, it could be anything. It could be reminds of Mustafar, or,
like Kessel was like that, wasn't it?
It poses interesting questions, but I think it highlights the genius, I think, of this series in respects that we are all focused on the kids' adventure.
Yeah.
And I think we all went in expecting it to be like, oh, it's kids and yeah. And yet actually on the side, there's this little mystery that's bubbling along. Yeah, I mean, it'd be amazing if it had like a massive, profound effect on how we perceive the Mandoverse going forward. It would be great because it wasn't expected and it wasn't telegraphed to us. It wasn't like they went out and saying, oh, it's about the kids, but really there's this big mystery behind the scenes and yada, 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 and then, which again is a good lesson for other Star Wars series coming.
It's kind of where Andor Season 2 is. That's going to drop in, and they've already said, Diego Luna said it, Tony Gilroy said it. You look at Rogue One, and there's a consequence of New Hope in a slightly different way because of what you're going to see in Season 2. But that feels different. One, I don't see many ancillary spin-off things from Andor Season 2. In terms of books and comics, for example. But with Skeleton Crew, if Skeleton Crew is in any other era, I would be thinking young readers, novels, Marvel
100%.
Spin-off comics, other action figures, that sort of thing, that they would really monopolise on it because it feels like it's going to catch hold. But because it's in the Mandoverse, in 5 years of that era, we haven't had spin-off comics. We haven't had spin-off books. Adam Christopher wrote a Mando book and it got shelved. So that is a conscious decision, presumably, by Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni to completely control the narrative of that era, and the Skeleton Crew is within that era.
Yeah.
It's not just going to be a story happening in that time, is it?
No, but I think also this is probably the one series that has a scope of being able to be a little bit more flexible, depending on what happens at the end of the season and what they go on to do. If they haven't greenlit Season 2 by the time, let's say, Celebration rolls around, unless they announce it at Celebration, then you've missed your boat, unless people have really started already working on ancillary material. Surely you could get away with a few Marvel comics or Dark Horse comics.
Probably more Dark Horse, actually, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah. You could get away with a couple of those and they could be completely inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, but they'd just be nice little, maybe, extra little character fluff bits and stuff that, which could be quite fun. A couple of like little anthology things and just helps flesh it out. And I suppose also it does give some people the option to get the merchandise, which is good because that's what you kind of need. And I think that's one thing that helps promote and keep the longevity of these series in our minds is if there's decent material coming out, be it expanded universe novels or if it's merchandise and visual dictionaries and stuff like that.
This is Adam Christopher and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
17th of June 2025 from writer Pablo Hidalgo. We will be getting the Star Wars The Acolyte visual guide, long overdue, and we don't get so many of these visual guides anymore, and they're always very, very welcome. It's got a forward from Amanda Stenberg, and it will give us a deeper dive into the world of The Acolyte. My question is, quite apart from very much looking forward to this book, 128 pages. I can give you the ISBN number if you want it, but I won't. Do you think now that The Acolyte is done as a TV show, or certainly as a live-action TV show, I still have this gut feeling it's going to come back in some form of animation. Do you think there is value? Do you think it's worth the effort to spend time and resources putting out books and comics and visual guides that tie in to The Acolyte when there's so much other stuff potentially on the horizon that they could, in the same way that Hasbro, we saw Steve Evans last week at Farthest From, and he was quite clear in saying there's only so many figures we can make. There's only so many slots we can plug things into.
Yeah.
There's only so much real estate in terms of literature and shelf space on shelves and yada yada. Do you think it's worth Lucasfilm spending the time? Bearing in mind, this book was probably completed before season 1 even aired. Do you think they should continue making Acolyte stuff? Or do you think maybe they should just park it and focus on other things?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you just said that it was something that's probably been written for a while. It's probably something that was written concurrently with production of the show, which makes kind of sense. Now that they've decided to not pursue a second season and possibly even just leave it as it is for the time being, then maybe they're just like, well, there's no harm. And to be fair, as we have seen in the more recent visual dictionaries, they don't tend to nail down the specifics in the way they once did. And that's probably not a decision by Pablo. That will come from higher up, probably from a story group or something, because again, you don't want to be tying things down in a visual dictionary that will appeal to a certain number of fans, but not to everybody. So I suppose if this does flesh out a little bit or give a little bit more background to the Acolyte, then cool. And had it pre-ordered since like August the 4th. If you had a Skeleton Crew visual dictionary slot and an Acolyte visual dictionary slot, and you could only pick one or the other, obviously right now anyway, and hindsight is a beautiful thing. You go, well, you go with Skeleton Crew, but maybe when this is announced and when they've had to put it to press and stuff, that would have changed. I've pre-ordered it in August and it's been pushed because I think it was going to come out in January or something, or February, and it's been pushed to June, almost a whole year since the release date.
And after Celebration, just worth noting, and Manny Jacinto is at Celebration, so it just makes you wonder whether or not there might be a backpedal coming.
Yeah, there could be something coming. Maybe there's no season 2 of Acolyte, but it doesn't mean that those characters are going to reside solely in those 8 episodes and nothing else.
That's true.
You know? And especially Osha and May and the Stranger, or whatever we want to call Manny's character. Those are the ones who are really would be able to be kind of like pushed forward.
Vanessa, yeah.
And Vanessa, exactly, yeah. So it's not by any stretch dead, but I mean, obviously, there's not a huge amount of like action figures coming out. I think, was it the retro series they're doing like a 6-pack or 8-pack?
Yeah.
That's the only one that I think would appeal to me because that's, you know, I only really collect retro series at the moment. You'd kind of think if you had loads of character slots for Hasbro, you would probably be rethinking some of your announcements. Otherwise, what's going to happen? They're going to be swinging on the pegs in the Entertainer in 6 years' time for like £2. It's not worth it, really.
No, it's a tough one. I think the era is so interesting and there's so little known about it. Your question of what would you go for, a Skeleton Crew or an Acolyte guide, that's a great question because, as you say, right now we're all hyped and buzzed and absolutely loving Skeleton Crew. I'm going to watch episode 3 again after we've recorded this because I enjoyed it so much. But really, like you say, when you dispassionately sit back, you know, for example, when they do, and all the big, you know, Variety will do it, Entertainment Weekly will do it, episodes of the year, they'll pick the top 20 TV episodes of the year. I would be genuinely surprised if that episode of The Acolyte, when Khmer just takes all those Jedi out.
Oh, what, not, was it Night? Yeah.
Night. If that episode's not in there, I'll be blown away because that episode, if you just had to pick one thing from The Acolyte, that's the thing you'd pick.
I think this is the frustrating thing, isn't it? The Acolyte, in its inception, in what we knew about it, and even what we kind of saw, there was potential there. It wasn't like a completely wasted opportunity.
Not at all.
Obviously, there was other issues that, you know, it didn't resonate with the general fans. It didn't resonate with a lot of the hardcore fans. So that's an issue. If you're not appealing to like general viewers and you're not really appealing to the fans, well, then that kind of says that you haven't really nailed the landing.
Yeah.
This is one of my slight gripes sometimes with obviously Disney Plus series, is that like every show really you have like the droid of a series, but it would be cool to just see a little pip. And so then suddenly kind of things are being blended in a much nicer way. Many people's kind of gripes about the sequel trilogy was like the aliens didn't feel like the OT or the prequel trilogy era aliens. But it only takes one Rodin or, you know, it's just a Fanon or whatever you want to pronounce it, back into the show in a show. And it's like, well, that's great because that's Star Wars and that's a connective thread. It doesn't connect to a specific character or anything. It's for a tapestry, isn't it? That is more important.
Completely that. I totally agree. And to your point about pip droids, I said that to Jack Parker. Wouldn't you love to see a pip turn up in the OT? Why can't they replace everyone's gun belts so they've got a little pip hanging off them? Everyone should have a pip, But it wouldn't be surprising, would it, if somebody suddenly pulled out a pip in Skeleton Crew? It'd be like, oh, okay, we know what that is. It makes all the sense.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, if they did something like that, and they actually found a pip droid on the Onyx Cinder, then again, that kind of starts to nail down the age and the origin of the ship.
Yeah, completely. That's a great shout. Wow, I'm really hoping we see one now. That makes all the sense in the world.
I'm going to be disappointed when we don't.
You're right in the sense that there was enough in the lore and the world of the characters of the time of the Acolyte that a visual guide is very, very welcome. I do think that when it comes out, the naysayers and the people that were just picking and bashing on Acolyte will just go, who asked for this? Well, who asks for anything? Yeah, it's very rare we get what we ask for, and we shouldn't get what we ask for. Go make it yourself. I hate the word consumers, but we do consume Star Wars in every way by spending our money on it, by spending our time on it, by
talking about it.
Exactly, talking about it, by doing what we do at conventions, going and covering other people talking about it. We're consumed by it in the best way. So we are consumers. But that sounds such a commercial phrase. It's not a phrase I
think, unfortunately, that's, like you say, it's the cold, hard truth of, I think, mega franchises really it's all about commercialization. But ultimately, you make a show, and you say most people are probably making a show because, yes, they have a story they want to tell, but two, because they want to make money or at least make a profit on it to justify making it. I mean, if nothing else, you want to get your money back for the investment you put in. Obviously, all this ancillary material is one of those ways of doing it. Every time you license the Star Wars name, they pay for a year's license in a territory. And you think about how many licensees there are for just about everything, from shampoo bottles to food products. So all of those, have paid at least for 1 year's license. Do the math. And DK, obviously, are one of them. And so therefore, they're like, well, we've got the license to produce these books. And really, there's not many books coming out at the moment because there's no films. You do hope, but, when we get back onto the release schedules of films and stuff, that we will start seeing like a Mando Grogu visual dictionary or encyclopedia or whatever. Novelization, graphic novel, the serialized one for Marvel, Matt. But I suppose it's all about timing, isn't it? I think probably the bigger question to this is, like, in some respects, the timing of this. It feels like it could be a little bit too late. You almost want a visual dictionary coming out just off the back of or on the release date. So maybe they've actually, they've had to delay it because they might have to nip some stuff out, which actually may have suggested what could be coming in season 2 that is no longer going to be.
They've sold a copy to you, Mark. They're going to sell a copy to me because I'm going to order it myself. 17th of June next year, it's out. Hey, let's try and get Pablo on the show to talk about the Acolyte visual guide. But until then, let's hope that there's more Acolyte-related stuff coming out, because I think there's definitely an audience for it, and I'd certainly like to see it.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for this episode of Making Tracks. So a big thank you to Mr. Newbold for joining me on another endless natter and mindless rambling. Also, massive shout out and thanks to Mark and Corin Spriggs for sending in the listener's question. Of course, keep those questions coming because those are some very juicy questions. But if anybody else has got a question, a thought or a theory, drop us a line and Mr. Newbold can tell you how you can do it.
Yes, I can, and here's how you can do exactly that.
Email radio@fanthatracks.com. Head to links.fanthatracks.com for links to our social media feeds, Fantha Tracks TV and Fantha Tracks Radio. Thanks to James Semple for the Fantha Tracks intro, Blues Harvest for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. New episodes drop Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time. Our weekly news show, Good Morning Tatooine, goes live Sundays at 9 o'clock UK time on Facebook and YouTube. And remember, Fantha Tracks is absolutely free, so it costs nothing to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
And that's me done for this episode, mate.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Nice one, matey. I will catch you hopefully midweek for an episode of Reaction Crew.
Yes, you will.
And then next week for another episode of Making Tracks.
Hopefully we'll put an episode out next week. Episode 213. Fingers crossed. Maybe, hopefully, possibly. But we will be doing Reaction Crew on Christmas Day, man.
Yes.
Christmas Day.
Christmas Day.
What do we like?
Well, I think that will be a question that will be asked in this household as well.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too.
Hold off opening your presents. I've got to go and record an episode of Reaction Crew. But hey, it's Christmas, and surely if you can't give the gift of Star Wars to people on Christmas Day, then when the hell can you do it? But until next week, or later this week anyway, stay safe, take care, and as always, may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Planet Leia.
I think you've kind of knit. No, you don't knit.
I don't knit. I crochet.